So when I made my original video about Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf, I did not include their names, partly because I didn't really want to make it specifically about this case, but more as a general understanding of young men's propensity to find themselves in violent altercations at a young age and, sometimes in the middle age. Unfortunately, that is a part of the male experience, being close to violence with each other. I didn't really think too hard about the story itself, cascading into the absolute buffoonery it has become. I was bothered by the usage of this story as another example of the violent baboon, ape-like, bestial tendencies of the Negro. I was greatly annoyed, and you know who else is annoyed? The father of Austin Metcalf, who on several different occasions asked for this to not be a story of race and all that goodness.
It's very unfortunate that this other child decided to make a bad choice that's going to affect him for the rest of his life. I have compassion for every human being. This is not, I want to make this very clear, this is not a race issue. This is not a black and white issue. I don't want someone stepping up on a soapbox trying to politicize this. I don't appreciate some of the remarks I've seen online.
And what bothers me also very greatly are the multiple different pattern recognition comments that I see people make.
Is not racially motivated as far as we know, but to act as though there isn't a component or a pattern that people recognize, that would only serve to breed more racism.
Countless millions of Americans are experiencing what's called black fatigue, which the Urban Dictionary defines as the deep mental exhaustion from being forced to care about black people and their actions 24/7.
It's not the first time that this has happened. I don't like getting into the race politics of stuff because I feel like down the road of the race politics is also gender politics, and I disagree with the conclusion of those gender politics. I disagree with the idea that men should be considered dangerous proactively because men statistically commit more crime. What I do think is that we need to be a lot more honest whenever you see people that are violent with low impulse control. These people are not fit for society. I think that anybody who pops off over a seating dispute and kills somebody over a seating dispute, he should have never been in a situation to have let this happen in the first place. And I think a lot of these people, they exhibit antisocial behavior, violent behavior for many, many years. Nothing is done about it. And then eventually it goes over the line, and then we're going to have to pay a bunch of fucking money to keep this piece of shit in jail.
What bothers me greatly is a lot of the misinformation on this case as well, and a lot of the sensationalism. And I really didn't want to be a part of that specifically. And I still kind of really don't. But it bothers me greatly the way very many people are treating this story. And it makes me believe that they haven't either been close to violence, they don't know anything about self-defense. They don't know anything about the experiences of a young man growing up in modernity. They don't know anything about what even actually happened on that day, besides even just reportings of the police report that was used between Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony. Now, I watched this video from this cop, Real Nathan Daily, I think it is. I think it's Real Nathan Daniels, which is a great channel, actually. Actually, it's a phenomenal channel. And I watched him kind of go over the police report because he's a police officer himself, and he sees details and he notices things that most people didn't. And I'm going to use a couple of different things he says in this video here, but for the most part, I do want to make this video here an actual discussion about what happened with Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. Where the original video was me discussing the concept of mercy, I want to actually kind of talk about specifically the events that occurred and kind of talk about the way multiple different, honestly, right-leaning and conservative media has really lost the plot on this one. And I mean, they've really lost the plot. Multiple different videos I've seen. And so one thing I think we should kind of start is kind of going over the certainty that this situation has zero nuance, that this situation is only about race, and that there's no way that this was an altercation. And to be fair, there are other people who have reported and at least have had the conclusion that this is, more a schoolyard, bucking contest between two young men, rather than a racial, whatever the flip we call this, that it has cascaded into. Which is ironic because a lot of this is only kind of exploded to this point because of the white racists, legitimately white racists on Twitter. And it's that new brand of white racist. It's the one that's more tired of the left wing and has been kind of pushed into becoming the very villains the left always said that they were. It's actually quite fascinating. It's actually really fascinating. Anyway, so let's actually talk about what happened, as far as we know, with Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony. Now, as far as we know, lots of people keep saying the truth, the facts, the blah, 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 blah. But what we really know, according even to the police report itself, is that for whatever reason, Austin Metcalf, beyond the fact that Karmelo was in a tent he wasn't supposed to be in, primarily as the aggressor, the primary aggressor, went to engage with Karmelo Anthony. We know this from multiple different witness reports. We know this even from the two witnesses in the police report that was originally released on the internet. Now, what is very peculiar to me is the downplaying of this interaction or this engagement from people like Mark Dice here.
You're at a track meet and someone tells you you're in the wrong tent and maybe even gives you a little shove on the shoulder to kind of encourage you to get out of the way.
And from people like Matt Walsh and even this white woman. And what bothers me is this certainty even from the people like the quartering.
Yeah, innocent until proven guilty and all of that. He'll get his day in court, as he should. But innocent until proven guilty, that applies to the court system legally. It does not apply to the court of public opinion. We're allowed to arrive at our own conclusions. I mean, okay, what happened here very clearly to me is that Karmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf not because Anthony felt threatened, but because Anthony felt disrespected.
So there are a lot of things that indicate that this kid was looking for a fight. He was looking for a reason to use the weapon that he had. So I have a problem with this because we are consistently, as a society, trying to apply the same rules to adult scenarios as we do to kids, and that has caused a lot of problems. There was absolutely no reason for this kid to have a knife. And based on how he behaved, as I said before, it looks like he was looking for a reason to use it.
There's a lot of people on the other side of this conversation who seem to think that this police report somehow exonerates this little violent thug, but I'd say it does quite the opposite.
Maybe not premeditated. I will show you how Karmelo Anthony put things into motion to justify him taking another person's life.
People are very certain that this is a clear, cold case of just murder from Karmelo Anthony. And they don't accept and they don't want to listen or even wait for the more information that would make them think a little bit more critically here. I'm concerned by how easily these people would believe that any human really would simply operate violently without being, well, a sociopath, psychopath, or traumatized by someone or something. Now, all of those things could be true about Karmelo Anthony. They could be. I don't know him. But it seems odd to jump to the conclusion that all of those things would be closer to the truth than, more reasonably, Karmelo Anthony, an untrained individual, had a weapon that would fulfill the gap in between his lack of ability to fight with his hands by giving him something that would allow him to compete in a dangerous situation. That is how very many people look at weaponry. across the board. Very many people make the comment, why should I learn self-defense? Why should I learn martial arts? I have a gun. And I've heard this for years. I hear this all the time. People are very comfortable saying that they don't need to learn how to use these hands because they have a gun. There is I'm going to use the word disrespect for what weapons can do as they fulfill the gap in between physical strength, fighting experience, and fighting knowledge. People are very comfortable. Interestingly enough, I'm not immune to even this part of being biased against Karmelo Anthony, because originally when I heard this story, I too really thought that Karmelo was another young black man, even close to a thug-esque black man who had a knife or had a weapon and had no respect for it. And that tone is actually seen in that original video. But as more information came out, I needed to update my firmware and say, things are a little bit more complex than that. For example, one thing that does add complexity is the fact that throughout multiple different reportings, including the police report that we got, and even from an interview with Hunter Metcalf, the surviving brother, we hear that it was raining profusely, which is an interesting detail. If it was raining that badly, does it not make sense that Karmelo Anthony would find himself underneath a tent? When you add that detail, it doesn't mean that Karmelo should have used a knife on Austin Metcalf. Unfortunately, people's brains are still very quick to believing that this story was something that happened extremely quickly. That Austin, even in some renditions, politely just asked Karmelo to leave, and then he just said, I have studied the way of the blade. Metcalf-san. I have waited for this moment. Be gone from this world. It's like, no, come on. That's not what happened. And in a reasonable world, we can probably, I would hope, or this is why I make this video, is to understand that it doesn't make sense to just assume or believe that any person would operate like that. Doesn't mean it's lawful, doesn't mean it's right, but there needs to be some more thought put into this, which is why we have a court of law. Because if you add the context that Karmelo was underneath a tent because it was raining profusely, well, now we have to ask, why did Austin bother him? We also even have to ask a very interesting question too. What did Austin say to him? Again, if the story is reported as something that's quick and a quick jumping to instantly wishing to engage in combat, well, yeah, I understand people's outrage. But if we stretch out the time and we look at the police report, which is what Real Nathan did, we learn that apparently this actually happened long enough for it to be recorded. This happened long enough for them to be arguing.
Also say, he states that Karmelo stated, punch me and see what happens. That's important. A short time later, this is important. He's saying he's given us a time frame, meaning that this event lasted longer than we all assumed it did. A lot of people believe that the person was grabbed, he was touched, then he was stabbed. No, what this indicates to me is that this has been taking place for a significant amount of time, right? This took place long enough for people to what? Video record. This took place long enough for there to have multiple witnesses. We're talking over 30 witnesses saw this argument. The witnesses explaining to us in a very coded language that this was a heated debate between two people.
If we look at this analysis, we also find that it was again Austin who is the primary aggressor of this entire dispute. And again, we have to be kind of fair here. I wasn't even fair to this because I didn't even think about it. Because again, I too have biases. I really did believe that Karmelo was a young black man who did not respect weapons. Why? There are many of young black men who don't respect weapons. There are many thuggy avenues and aspects of black culture that unfortunately is the only type of, or only element of black culture really, that very many people on the internet ever interact with or touch. Even I, yes me, believed that it was reasonable that Karmelo was a jackass, talking shit, talking reckless as Hunter said, and I accepted that. But again, with more information, with more context being added, we should be able to think a little bit more critically here. For example, let's look at the case with Danny Penny and Jordan Neely. In this case, we have a crazy homeless man coming on the train and yelling, after he throws his jacket on the ground, that he will kill everyone, that he doesn't care, he'll go to jail, right? And this has been corroborated by multiple people on the train, including in the body cam footage the day it happened. This is consistent. That's what Jordan Neely did. Daniel Penny went to restrain him. I don't really know the exact events of how they got into a tussle and restraining him, but he restrained him. While restraining him in a chokehold, Jordan Neely dies. Now here's the thing. Daniel Penny is innocent of manslaughter, murder, anything like that. Why? Well, because the jury seemed to have ruled that if someone says, if someone makes the case, if it is reasonable, if you believe that someone will engage in a violent act against you, then you have a right to engage in self-defense. That's what was ruled. Jordan Neely never hurt anyone, never touched anyone, never did anything. And it was also deemed that Daniel Penny did not use excessive force against Jordan Neely as well. Fair enough, right? If it is the case that someone can say they're going to harm you, and as such you then have a reasonable claim that you need to defend yourself from what someone threatened and said, then why do we ignore what the flip Austin Metcalf said to Karmelo to make him reply, "If you touch me, see what happens"? If that's a response to something, well, clearly Austin had to have said something pretty physical too. Something that is so peculiar to me is how many people take that as a provocation. You've seen it with a couple of different examples here.
You're going to have to explain to me how somebody would walk up to somebody and invite them to hit them, to touch them, to engage with them physically in some way if they are truly afraid of them, if they are truly worried that this person is going to present some kind of life-threatening situation to them. Because
further instigated it by saying, touch me and see what happens. This is a guy looking for a pretext. He's provoking an altercation, looking for a pretext to commit violence, very clearly.
Now this is absurd to me, absolutely absurd to me. But it may also be a cultural divide, I don't know, maybe perhaps. Because in the entirety of my existence in this mortal coil, I've never ever heard the term touch me and see what happens to be a provocation. If you believe that to be a provocation, then you must look me dead square in the face, and you must also defend, my friend, that if you see a rattlesnake rattling its tail, that you then interpret that as the opportunity to attack the rattlesnake, that the rattlesnake has goaded you into attacking it. If you were to see a cobra fan its hood, you must argue that you believe that that is the time to engage with that cobra. You must argue that if you were to see a dog growl at you, or bark at you, snarl its teeth, bare its fangs, that you interpret that as a provocation to engage with that dog. Because if you can't argue or defend that any one of those other signs of threats from those animals are a provocation, then you must help me understand how you believe touch me and see what happens is provoking violence. Because I've never interpreted it as such. In fact, that just seems to be the verbal reflection of growling, barking, fanning your hood, and rattling your tail. And considering that animals consistently do this activity, I do find it very interesting how when it comes to humans, we forget that we are also animals. Animals that typically don't want to fight, which is something that I included in the video that I made previously, that overwhelmingly people don't want to fight. But what is so peculiar is because, and to be quite frank, racist stereotypes or stereotypes on the behaviors and the operations of black men, people believe that black men are just inherently more violent and dangerous. To be quite honest with you, if it is the case that they are inherently more violent and dangerous, it seems rather goofy to constantly, well, ironically, racially provoke them on the internet and talk about being a racist person who's tired of them. It would kind of make sense that you would think you'd want to leave them alone or try to figure out a way to quell their rage. But you see, people don't operate like that because they're not actually scared, because they haven't actually been around people who are like that. You want to know the people who are, interesting enough, oftentimes finding themselves close to black men like that? Other black men. Go figure. Anyway, that's kind of besides the point. Really, what is concerning to me is the lack of ability to at least accept manslaughter, to accept that this could have gone in so many different ways, to accept that maybe Karmelo is not a vile demon.
This Karmelo Anthony case is extremely disturbing. I outlaid a bit of the facts before we went to break. But what's happening now is this is weirdly breaking down along racial lines because
to leave. He refused, and the moment hands were placed on him, he went in for the kill. No warning, no attempt to de-escalate the situation, just straight to lethal force. And
Austin told Karmelo to move from their tent. What does he say? He says, then Karmelo grabbed his bag and opened and reached inside. He told Austin, touch me and see what happens. Austin proceeded to touch Karmelo.
For the kill. No warning, no attempt to de-escalate the situation, just straight to lethal force.
He told Austin, touch me and see what happens.
No warning, no attempt to de-escalate the situation, just straight to lethal force.
By this creature, because they got into a slight disagreement about where this individual is supposed to be in the wrong place. And so he did what thugs do and acted like an animal.
There are, of course, people who believe the mere fact that Major Anthony even had a weapon means that he was looking for a fight. That him just sitting in the area was him provoking with his presence.
Under a tent of a school that he was not a student at. And in my opinion, in doing so, you are looking for conflict because you know that if you go under a tent, if you are in an area that you are not supposed to be in, you know that somebody is going to approach you and tell you to leave. So you have made a choice, intentionally putting yourself into a situation where conflict is probably has a very high likelihood of happening.
Why isn't it self-defense? Well, first of all, he instigated it by being in the wrong place and refusing to leave.
Well, here's the thing. No one needed to fight if Austin, one, left them alone, or two, just talked to him. And to be quite honest with you, it is extremely tragic that a brother lost his brother, and that a father lost his son, and that a mom lost her son. But politicizing this and making this a racial internet war does nothing to heal or help his memory at all. What we probably could or should be doing is trying to help young men understand that the pride and the social issues and problems around your upbringing as a male should not lead you into this bucking. Bucking coming from the term buck, which is a male deer that has a lot of testosterone during mating season that fight other male deers as they wrangle their antlers together and try to make them submit. What I'm saying here by verbalizing this and using other animals is to help you visualize and understand that there's a lot of unspoken cultural things about being a young man that is far more of a problem than there is anything to do with race. Why do I say this? Because every stereotype that has been put on about young black men doesn't actually apply to Karmelo. Not only as an individual with a 3.7 GPA, an individual that has 2 jobs, not one, as an individual that is the captain of his own football team and track team, and as an individual that was raised by a stay-at-home mom with a father that was affluent enough to afford that for 3 other children as well, he's not the violent thug caricature that people are putting on him. Which, interestingly enough, should give you pause to again think for a moment, well, wait a minute, hold on. Why did he have the knife? Great question. And what happened to make him think he needed to use it? Great question. The acceptance that he simply is feral and wishes only for war and combat is absurd. Because, as it turns out, the one who engaged the altercation is Austin. And Austin is the one who comes from the broken family. And Austin is the one that has a father that has a criminal record. And Austin is the one raised by a single mother. The stereotypes are flipped. But rather than that making us understand that perhaps it is not race and stereotypes that is the issue here, people just move the goalposts and just refuse to acknowledge and even come into lots of different lies and chicanery and bullshittery about how the Gibson GoFund is being misappropriated by the Karmelo family, when what's more reasonable is the affluent man that has a stay-at-home wife maybe lives in a good area and anyway, lots of different misinformations and reportings about the misappropriating funds. I mean, the Quartering used this headline here, right? But if you read the article, nowhere in the article itself does it even say that they even had access to the funds and used the funds to buy a $800,000 house. And even then, if there's a $300,000 difference between the house they would have purchased. Are they renting the house? Did they get a loan on the house? Did they get a mortgage on the house? There's details here about purchasing a house that is completely ignored. What's even more ignored is, again, they didn't even have access to the Gibson GoFund to begin with, because there's multiple different processes, which is the same thing from GoFundMe as well, where they have to verify the person, verify the bank account, and then do an ACH transfer of the funds to begin with to even begin to be used. Which is just how banking works anyway. What concerns me is so much of the plot is lost when we have misinformation like that. When again, there are more important things about what transpired here that isn't Karmelo Anthony's family, who didn't do anything wrong, being besmirched. There are some things that are just so nasty and awful and terrible, like Karmelo Anthony's mom cries that their daughter is terrified. And the comments are just so alien to me. There's one comment off the top of my head I remember where someone said, yeah, I bet your daughter is scared because she lives with a murderer. What kind of black heart cares not for a child in fear of the comments of other people? Not her brother, but everyone else proclaiming that they wish to hurt her when she didn't do anything wrong. That's how goofy and cascaded, or how this situation cascaded into something that is just horrendous. Austin Metcalf's dad doesn't want any of this, once again, to be racialized. I mean, shoot, there is a whole, I guess, gathering or riot or something with some white people and some black guy with them too, oddly enough. I don't really know what that was about.
That's called white guilt.
No, let it talk. You're creating more Austin Metcalfs with your weakness, sir.
What's odd is that him saying that makes him appear weak to the race baiters on the internet who want to make this a problem of race, when in reality this is an issue of young men feeling the pressure and need to fight. If we go back to what happened with Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf, if we go back and we analyze to the best of our ability with the knowledge that we have, The great pretending that this isn't the pride of two men scratching against each other is ridiculous. Because in what world would any person want to be punked out of a seat so they have to go stand in the pouring rain? And in what world would any person want to be told to back down after they started an altercation in the first place? A lot of pride, a lot of anger, hyping from other students even, or hyping from other people around you to engage in to fight is something that is extremely common. We see this in many different fight videos on the internet all the time. White, black, Mexican, Asian, all the time. There's hype men all around you wishing for you to fight and engage. You're not just fighting for your physical safety, you're fighting for your pride in front of a group of people. And the great pretending that we don't understand that is laughable to me. I understand it very well. Why? Because I was in those situations. I have been close to violence. I have been so angry that I wanted to hurt other people. I'm not even going to pretend that in some of those situations it would have been self-defense. In some of those situations, I wanted to hurt them. And I won't act like I'm better than you. I am going to act like I'm wiser than you, that I'm older than you, that I know more, that I've been in these situations and I understand the adrenaline. I understand the anger. I understand the social pressure. I understand all of it. And with that understanding, I can say definitively that it really sucks that Karmelo had a knife, because we wouldn't be here if he didn't. I can say definitively that at the very least, it's easy to believe that Karmelo shouldn't have had the knife, because I still believe that honestly from the bottom of my heart. But it's also disingenuous to pretend that there's no case or there's no way that this situation couldn't have played out in a different way. For example, Real Nathan says this detail here that I didn't really think too much about.
I have to wait for you to use deadly force. If I have reason to believe that you're using a force on me, or you're going to use a level of force that's going to put me in great bodily harm or death, I can use lethal force against you. This is why I say this entire case hinges on the conversation and the verbal dispute that took place between Karmelo and Austin. What did they say that made Karmelo believe that he was in fear for his life? That's so important. And these are the things that get shelled out during trial. And people are like, oh, wow, I didn't know he said that. Oh, wow, I didn't know he did that. This is why we have to wait for the facts of the case to be revealed before we pass judgment. It's innocent until proven guilty. That's how it works. Okay, so let's be real about the context. We don't know what was said. We don't know what words and what was threatened. But we know threats were made because Karmelo made a statement and said, do it and see what happens. And when we go back to the witness statement, the issue with the witness statement is the witness worked really hard of only mentioning the statements Karmelo made, but the witness didn't make the statements that Austin made. What were the threats that Austin made that made Karmelo believe that he was in fear for his safety? And guess what? If no threats were made, Karmelo doesn't have an argument. Okay, it goes both ways, you guys.
If you look at these reports from the witnesses, they are biased. It is reporting what Karmelo said, but it is not reporting what Austin said. And it's reasonable. It is reasonable that Austin's friends wouldn't want to paint him in a bad light, especially after he just got stabbed and killed. But while it might be reasonable to understand why they painted the story this way, that doesn't mean it's the full, complete accounting of what occurred. This is another addendum clip. I was thinking about this while I was at work earlier today. It is interesting that very many people who discuss this case and discuss this topic do take the word of the witness over the word of the primary perpetrator, who would be Karmelo Anthony, obviously, which is actually pretty peculiar to me. I was thinking about this, and very many people accept the interpretation or the rendition of the threat as touch me and see what happens. But what's interesting is when Karmelo is met with the police officer, he says, I told him not to touch me. Karmelo also goes on and he asks if this could be considered self-defense. And this is actually really really obvious and consistent to me that a 17-year-old wouldn't know the law very well, and that a 17-year-old who admitted to all of this would be even comfortable speaking with a police officer. That's interesting. I was watching two lawyers talk about how this was foolish for him to speak in this clip here.
And so the resource officer basically responded, look, man, I don't even know what happened at this point. And so those are all the statements that we are aware of right now, and those are all the witness statements.
Apparently, Mr. Anthony has not watched any of our videos, and he hasn't heard us say any of the millions of times that we've said, just shut up. And he decides to make all these statements. As you mentioned, I was protecting myself. He put his hands on me, I think is another statement. He says, I'm not alleged. I did it. He put his hands on me. I told him not to. Is he going to be okay? Could it be considered self-defense? Well, he just took away a whole bunch of different possibilities of defenses right there. He admitted he was the person. He said he put his hands on me. That's what he said. He didn't say there was a whole group of them coming towards me. He didn't say, I thought he was reaching for something, a gun, a knife, a bat, something like that. He didn't say, I was really worried because I was on the bleachers and I could fall and get hurt or get thrown off or something like that. Once you start talking, yes, what you say matters, but also what you didn't say matters, right?
And to me, this seems more to the case that there is an innocence or even naivete to Karmelo Anthony that should dispel the idea that he is a brutal, cold-blooded, premeditating murderer.
Said, like, you know, if you lay hands on me, see what happens, something like that. And as he was doing it, he was reaching into a bag, and Austin Metcalf did put hands on him and tried to make him get out of the seat, and he stabbed him through the heart with a knife that he had in that bag. It's just a depraved act. It's a depraved act. I don't know what's wrong with the family he grew up in or with him.
His statement she gave was it's passive language. This tragic incident. It's not a tragic incident. It was an aggressive, fatal act taken by your son that took the life of another 17-year-old. You have to, like in that presser, actions speak louder than words. Well, sir, the guy you're defending stabbed a 17-year-old in the heart to death at a football game over a seat. So yeah, I guess actions do speak louder than words.
Of him to go out there and rail about racism in America. Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? There is no dispute. There's no dispute that Karmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf in the heart with a knife while not being threatened with any sort of weapon himself.
Not only with his comfort with speaking to the police, but asking the police and even showing remorse by asking if Austin is okay. The narrative is very, very strange when, again, we take the word of the witness who is biased, right? And it's not wrong for the witness to be biased, you know. And the police report, again, the officer saw that the witness was also with Hunter. So it implies they were together, they're friends. It makes sense that the account is in the favor of Austin. He just witnessed his friend die. It makes perfect sense. I'm not knocking him for that. But it's biased. That's factually true. And it's also factually true that Karmelo Anthony's account is also biased. That his account would be, I told him not to touch me. So either way it goes, what we have consistently are threats of disengagement. Touch me and see what happens. Punch me, see what happens. I told him not to touch me. It's entirely possible that both of these things were said at the same time, even. Like they were said back to back. That as time escalated, first it was touch me and see what happens, then it was don't touch me. Or it was don't touch me, then if you touch me. It's entirely possible that both things were said at the same time. But I think it's interesting how, again, we do not take into account what he said, but the media, and very many people comment upon this, lead with and run with, and even I did it, right? Like I'm not any different. I did it too. But we put a lot of stock into touch me and see what happens, punch me and see what happens, but we put zero stock into I told him not to touch me. Either way, it seems very consistent to me when we add all the details together that Karmelo didn't want to fight. To me, at least. And so now we'll resume with the original video that I recorded. Real Nathan also points out this detail here.
We just got a little altercation. That's really it, but he has a good heart. Everyone knows. Everyone around here knows he's a great kid. He just one mistake from that dude, and just took my brother. He didn't deserve it.
Now, listen, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but Hunter implicates himself in this altercation, you guys. What did he say? He said, we. He specifically said, we got into a little altercation. What does that mean, you guys? He then also tells his father all the intricate details of the event. What does that mean to me? As an officer, as an investigator, that means to me that you had a level of involvement. When you said we were involved in an altercation, my question now to you, Hunter, as an investigator, is what role did you play? What did you say? What did you do in that moment? Where were you when your brother stood up and he pushed?
Now, this is a very important and critical detail to me. Excuse me. If it is the case that Hunter Metcalf, the brother, was also involved in the altercation, then it does make the claim of self-defense a lot stronger. The great pretending that two twin brothers could not have been engaging on the young man is ridiculous to me, especially when we account for something very important. In an interview that Hunter himself made, he says this.
And we're walking back to our stand. We put our tent up so all the bleachers were right there. We're not wet from all the rain. We come back, we sit down, and this kid said something behind me. I've never met this kid in my entire life. I never knew who he was. Said something just inappropriate and uncalled for. And I turned around and asked him who he was. He started getting really aggressive. My brother stepped in. He started being, how he always is with me, just brothers, just having my back.
The original altercation, from Hunter's words, is that Karmelo began it with him, and Austin then sticks up for his brother, which means to some extent Hunter was involved. Or it's a different story to paint a different picture for the media, or to de-emphasize the character of Austin as the primary aggressor. That could also be the case. I don't know. Not yet. Not entirely. But the issue is pretending or feeding into the rage or the rage bait that Karmelo simply studied the way of the blade. It's disingenuous. It's very disingenuous to operate on that belief structure. One final thing I kind of wanted to touch upon is, again, the downplaying of the original assault. Mark Dice does this. He says,
that person says, hey, get out of the way, and gently shoves you on the shoulder. You're not allowed to then pull out the gun and shoot them, Tim.
To me, again, it goes back to, let's be reasonable. In what world would you accept anyone lightly pushing your son or your child? And here's what's interesting. If anyone did that to a young lady, no one would accept that as fine or appropriate. And so it's really interesting to me that we'll downplay that assault into something that in any other context you still wouldn't even accept as appropriate, no matter what. But again, I ask, well, what did Austin say when he lightly touched them? Because if he said, I'm going to drag your feet across this field if you don't move, that's different than, come on, man, you gotta go, get out of here. What did he say? More than what he said, there's also something else that's pretty critical. And that's the amount of stab wounds Austin had. The stab wound didn't immediately kill Austin. Austin was stabbed, and then, according to Hunter, he ran back over to his brother. He ran back over to his group. Again, according to that account. So he didn't immediately die, which means he didn't strike him immediately in the heart. He had to have struck him somewhere in this area. but probably closer to the left side or the right side of his body. Again, I don't have the autopsy. This is just from what I know about fighting in combat. He didn't die immediately, but it isn't just that he didn't die immediately. It's that he was struck once and then Karmelo ran away. Now, very many people say that he ran to ditch the murder weapon. He ran away from the scene, but he didn't actually leave the track meet. He did go behind a fence, and when the police officer originally came, when he met Karmelo, they were separated by a fence, which means that he was still in the vicinity and he was still able to be pointed out. He didn't leave the crime scene at all. That's how he was detained in the first place. No one had to go find him. He was still there. That's critical, because what Karmelo did was he disengaged from combat. What does that mean? Any person that understands self-defense, or any person that has any self-defense training, knows that your ultimate objective, even in harming your opponent, is to remove yourself or eliminate the threat. It's not to beat them. It's not to harm them. It's not to smash their face into the ground like you see in a fighting video. It's to disengage and leave, which is what occurred. If it is the case that Karmelo strikes once, which is what we heard in the report, he leaves the environment, which is what you're supposed to do in a self-defense situation, and he stays and admits to him being the one who stabs Austin Metcalf. It is unreasonable to me to conclude that this was premeditated murder from a bloodthirsty beast. That, my friends, is not an appropriate conclusion to come to. It is not reasonable when you include that detail from that knowledge and that understanding of how a physical altercation can occur to believe premeditation number one, which you'd have to prove anyway. But more than that, to paint the picture of someone who was wishing for combat doesn't make any sense if, again, we also include the details of Karmelo saying, if you touch me, I will retaliate, which is a more formal way of saying, if you attack me or if you engage on me, I will respond with force. That's the formal way of saying, touch me and see what happens. Somehow I'm able to understand this intelligently. I must be one of the good ones, I guess. I don't know. The point is, and the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I see a lot of people who don't understand combat talking about combat and being very matter of fact that they understand what happened and what occurred. And it is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. I see a lot of people racializing a problem that isn't an issue of race, but an issue with the way culturally we have young men bred into an environment where they have to protect their egos and they have to protect their pride and they have to prove themselves as men constantly. This is more of a men's rights problem than it is a race problem. But unfortunately, that reality of what young men have to grow up with and understand is completely overshadowed by something that no one asked for. Austin Metcalf's father didn't ask for it. Karmelo Anthony's father didn't ask for it. No one asked for it. And yet here we are trying to make a young man, make a young black kid look like a demon, when in all actuality, he's probably someone who made a horrendous mistake. I think that a manslaughter charge is reasonable. And if Karmelo is convicted of manslaughter, I think that's fair, 100%. I think that makes a lot of sense. If it is the case that he elevated this situation with the usage of a knife when he was grabbed on the shoulder, too much force. But if it is the case that Austin was making threats, how he grabbed him, bear hug. How did he grab him? Grabbed his neck. How did he grab him? He grabbed him by his waist and was ready to drop him on his head. How was he grabbed? I don't know. Which is pretty critical, because we have to understand, if you're grabbed in that aggressive manner, if you're tackled, it changes how not only one would respond with the knife, but what Karmelo was thinking. The fact remains that Austin should have never touched him. This much is true as well. But it's also true, we can confirm, that depending on how the situation went, Karmelo could have raised the stakes far too high. And I think that's fair. If we catch a video and we see that Karmelo raised the stakes far too high, by all means, manslaughter. And I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is painting him out to be a monster, a thug, someone who is literally not any of the stereotypes people wish to paint him by using him as an example of how black men are monsters. Black men are just violent. There's this violence in our culture. It's ironic because someone made a comment on my other video and they say, why are you ignoring and not speaking about the violence in your culture? And I sat there and I said to myself, and I said to him too, I said, fam, the entire video is literally about mercy. What more do you want me to do? What? Nigga! The whole video is about mercy. I'm saying that every young man has to temper themselves. And every young man has to temper any of the pride and the hyping. And every young man has to have a strong understanding of fighting and combat and being in these negative situations. That is what I'm saying. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, Puerto Rican, I don't care. I care about you. I care about you enough to go against the grain and tell you, listen, fam, you don't have to do this. And that is the important memory to Austin Metcalf's life that we could and should use to help other people out. And it is unfortunate that he died. It's painful that he died. It's sad that he died. But racializing this and using this as a measuring stick to cause more pain and misery to other people who had nothing to do with it spits on that young man's entire life. It absolutely spits on it. And that, as much as I want to give a fairness to Karmelo, that's the reality that we've given to having some fairness to Austin Metcalf. That he dies and we racialize it and we use this as a measuring stick to harm other people who had nothing to do with it. That's the issue here. And that's why I wanted to make this video, as well as kind of go over these responses and kind of give a different perspective, honestly, because it seems to me the people talking, they treat this police report like it's the Holy Grail and then completely ignore the cultural context, the context of being a man, the context of violence, the context of fighting, the context of fear, the context of the environment. There's so much context here that gets ignored if you simply say someone got stabbed over a seat. Yeah, that's a great sensationalized title. But the more we add to this story, the more we paint this picture, the more you update your firmware, the more you should be able to say, maybe my preconceived notions were wrong. It's a lesson I had to learn in my life. If you've been a long time subscriber and if you stayed this long into the video, I'll tell you something really, I'll tell you. The reason why I don't like making videos on trending topics is because I don't always have all the information to come to a reasonable conclusion. So I wait, I'm patient, I study it, I learn it, I collect my thoughts. Because very many years ago I made a video talking about Trayvon Martin. I talked about how awful it was that George Zimmerman was found not guilty. I talked about how terrifying it could have been as a young black man too, to walk around and have someone attack me, only to learn that I was wrong. Trayvon did attack George Zimmerman. Reasonably, if you ask me, if some nigga's stalking you on your way home, it makes sense you'd want to disengage or get him off of you. But it's also true that Trayvon used excessive force. He whooped the bricks off of George Zimmerman, as embarrassing as it is for him. And it's also true that George Zimmerman felt that in that moment he had to pull the gun out and shoot Trayvon once. And I was wrong. I was wrong about my understanding there. And that's why it's important to be patient and understand these situations and come to reasonable conclusions over a period of time. And so that being said, I certainly hope you guys got something out of today's video. I kind of doubt it, but if you did, I don't know, man, go and click the like button. Nah, shoot, go and click the subscribe button. Comment in the comment box below, and as always, you guys have yourselves a great day. I'll see you cool cats soon. Adios.